So we have 4 directions of attention. I'm just going to label these: internal, external, breath, and a category, a functional group that I call cognition. And we're going to label that one last. So I'll create a box. You could, if you wanted to, call this a toolbox, and we'll talk about that later. And diversifying our toolbox. What is that? Talk about that too. And if you can come Sunday, I'll talk about breath techniques that I use throughout the day. There's lots of breath techniques that you can do, like during a more formal meditation, and that's all good. But you can get that online. I'll talk about the stuff that is a part of the 4 directions that you can do while you're washing the dishes or navigating a challenge on the train because somebody is standing way too close to you for comfort. And you're like, what do I do in this situation? All right. So internal points of attention is what psychology would call introspective attention. That's a challenge to spell. So I'm just going to say inside attention. We could call this body awareness. We could focus on points of the body. Skin, tactile sensation. And remember, these are functional groups, and actually a couple of them are a little interchangeable. A little. So the internal direction of attention, I should have started with external because that's the one we start with. Oh well, just keep in mind that we typically would start with external, just for the sake of consistency at least. And here I am not being consistent, so I started with internal. So internal point of attention, I like to also look at it sometimes as structure or structural integrity or posture. So if I'm aware of my body position in terms of how I'm sitting, how I'm standing, how I'm walking, I consider that all internal. And basically internal is just, even if it's just a few inches off of my body, I consider in Chinese medicine, we have something called Wei Qi, and that's a type of defensive qi that exists on the outside of your body. I still consider that internal because it's just so darn close to your body that it's just good enough for the sake of functional categorization. So with that in mind, any questions about what I'm calling the internal direction of attention? And I intend to get very specific, but for the sake of the time that we have, I can't get specific on every single, specific point of attention that we can intend in advance. This is the general directions and kind of what we're looking at when we do this practice. Because if I got specific, I like to make acupuncture points on my body a point of internal attention. And actually, I believe that may have clinical applications. But the biggest thing I run into when I talk about that is, Ernest, you're never going to get somebody to pay attention to LI4 long enough for it to activate. And I'm like, well, maybe I can. Maybe there's a way. That's a drum roll. Any questions about the internal direction of attention? Does that make sense?
So you're saying to pick one. We pick one.
You could pick 2 if you wanted to, but at least one.
Okay. And does it matter which one?
Not necessarily. You could
So
be
we
in
just need, when we're picking a point of attention to focus on, we're picking one. And I remember in the beginning for me, I call it the lowest hanging fruit, the easiest one for me to focus on that I'll be able to hold and maintain for as long as I can until I get really good at it. I'll pick the easiest one.
Yeah.
Eventually, the easiest one becomes, it's like the end table in the living room. You forget to even look at it. And so I have to pick another one because
Mhm,
it's new and it will help me stay focused on it. But in the beginning, I had to pick the easiest ones.
mhm. That makes sense. Yeah. The best exercise is the one that you're going to enjoy and the one that you're going to do consistently. So, in regard to the direction of, or the specific point of attention that we would use in this direction, as Donna pointed out, it's the one that you're going to enjoy, the one that you're going to be the most likely to remember. And that's just helping you to establish and elongate. You really have to diversify. And so Donna said, does it matter which one? And I say not necessarily, but you may find that certain ones work better in certain situations. And that will be also another topic that we would call maybe segmenting or maybe preparing for areas of our day or experiences that we know could be more challenging. And I hate this denial thing that exists in the world where we pretend where we have no challenges in life or that that's an attainable thing. You know, on December 11th, I have to take the hardest exam I've ever taken in my life. You know, I would be stupid to think that going into that hardest thing that I've ever done in my life is going to be exactly the same as going to the bathroom or going downstairs and taking my dog for a walk. I'm not Buddha. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to make sure that I'm prepared. I'm going to make sure the second that I wake up, I start to clear my mind so that I can be as relaxed as possible going into that exam because it's very important to me. It has a lot to do with my impeccable intent and my act of will, and it must be done. You see what I mean? So we can actually, and this is also something that relates to what Santina was talking about yesterday, we can actually determine the strength that we pay attention to each direction. So I can be aware of all four, but I can also put extra attention on one of those four, or maybe even two of those four, or linking them together, as we'll talk about later, how you can link directions. And now you have one technique that's hitting both. That's getting fancy. Let's not get too fancy in the beginning, but that is all something that you can do. Does that make sense? It can be very situational.
Sure, we learned how to balance, but balance doesn't have to mean equal parts of everything. It
Exactly.
can
Yeah,
be a lot of one and a little of another, or like a
absolutely.
recipe. Yeah, it's
Yes.
just about balance and how we find that balance is going to be very individual
Mhm.
and change from moment to moment. That's okay.
Right. Yeah, and as I'm about to show you, we have external points of attention. Like when I go out into a forest, I probably want to increase some of my points of attention in the external direction because I've never seen this before. I want to look at the detail in that moment. So, but I'm not going to totally disregard my own body. So I'll still have body awareness, which is the direction that I just explained. And so we do have some freedom to create how we want to with these directions because it's our life, it's our attention. We get to create what we want. I can't tell you what to do with that. That's not how this works. I just show you how to do the practice and you create it your own. You have to. You can't do the practice the way that I do it. That makes absolutely no sense. I mean, unless you can't. I'm not even going to create some fictional example that's ludicrous because you cannot do my practice the way I do it. But you can follow the exact same principles and the exact same format because it works. Okay, so we're going to go from inside to outside. So external is sensory perception. I would also put temperature, which is arguable because you are feeling it on your skin, but it's a product of your environment. It's changing as your environment changes. So it has been more comfortable for me to keep it in the external direction of attention as I work with it. Again, this is a functional grouping. So if you came to me and you said it feels more internal, I'd be like, fine, well, what's your external then? You have an external, go. I mean, it's good. You know, your points and your directions are valid. Not valid, not paying attention. Valid, paying attention. So that's pretty much external. we could say proprioception, but I like to, I think that's more of a linking between internal and external. And that starts to create your bubble of perception, by the way, which is what we started talking about at the beginning of the study. If somebody wants to talk to me about the flow state, I want to talk to them about the bubble of perception, because that's how I talk about it. So external points of attention, vision, what I see, what I hear, what I taste, what I touch. You want to know, this is a funny question. How do you interact with your environment? And I don't mean, I mean output. Like, how do you interact with your environment? If I'm just listening to you, I'm not interacting necessarily. I mean, I am, but I'm not. We could get very technical, but just in a general sense, how do you interact with your environment? What do you do?
Yeah, I'm interpreting what I perceive with my senses.
Interpretation is an inside job.
Okay, then I'm talking
Talking is one, I would say. You're sending out a vibration into the air, and you're doing that for the sake of communication.
and moving.
Moving is one, and how do you move? You have to undulate your body with your feet and your hands and stuff, right?
Right.
Taking things in. Let's see, that is input. So maybe that's, no, maybe that's a different thing. Maybe that's the input, not the output. So taking things in, now that's interesting. But no, we needed to get here, Lauren. That's exactly where I wanted to go. So what you're seeing, are you actually, is your vision going out to the object?
No, you're receiving
Ah,
reflections of light.
so you're receiving reflections of light. Right. Are your ears, is there some force that's going out to the thunder? And that's how you hear thunder?
Vibrations are coming into your
Ah,
ear canals and and you're perceiving those.
okay. So in the way that we're talking about it, that we're not really interacting with that thunder is interacting with us. And of course we could get technical, and then the interaction is always a two-way street, but let's just keep it general for our thought experiment. Okay, so sensory perception is fundamentally input. Can we agree on that then?
Okay.
One of the most interesting things, though, is that our attention is a very subtle form of output, because we know that it interacts with the environment. So your hands interact with the environment, but your eyes don't, unless it's your attention, which of course we're sight dominant. So pretty much everywhere we're looking, our attention is following. So although the light entering our eyes is input, our attention on what we're seeing is output. Our attention is going out to meet it. And that's a form of interaction with our environment. So believe it or not, one of the main ways that we can interact with our environment is with attention itself, not just with our arms and legs and body and the air that we push out to communicate with one another. Attention itself is one of the primary ways that the human being is meeting the environment out there. And that is a part, that's a theory. We can test that, and we can recreate those experiments currently. So I can talk about it. If it gets upended and stuff like that, then I won't talk about it anymore. But that's how science works. Does that make sense? Or did I
It
just,
makes sense, and I never thought about it that way
well, there you
until
go.
this moment, and I've been practicing this for years. So yes, it makes sense that the perception with our senses is an internal
Mhm.
its input coming in, but our attention on it is where we meet it.
Bingo. In fact, if we wanted to get even more technical, your perception of it is actually a chemical experience.
Right.
And
Never
if
thought
you
about it that way.
and if you really wanted to get even more technical, which happens first, the experience or what encourages the energy potential in the axon?
Uh, I don't know what happens first. I think it's a simultaneous thing because
It can't be.
I've chosen it.
It can't be. The impetus has to be before. The only answer is that, and this is my favorite answer, is that what precedes us. This is a little bit of a tangent. I'm going to get right back on track. We'll be done by six. This is a larger topic, so I was going to allow for about 50 minutes. And then I just forgot what we were saying. Oh, so
You're
good.
talking about meeting the moment, that perception.
Well, I thought about that a million times, but
Okay.
okay. Oh, that was good though.
There's a quote that comes to mind when you're talking about this stuff, and I'm
Mhm.
not sure whose quote it is. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change.
Exactly.
Is that
Yeah.
relevant?
Yeah. It's relevant. It's a poetic way of looking at it. But Santina brought it back. Which came first? That's way too technical. But let's say that you want to raise your hand, right? You have decided to raise your hand. That decision was a chemical occurrence. And sodium and potassium had to enter the axon before you even had that thought. The thought had to have happened after the sodium and the potassium entered the axon to begin the action potential, which will then release the neurotransmitter, which is the chemical that creates our experience. So we were talking about the light coming into our eyes. So we're not actually even really perceiving the outside world directly. We're creating a chemical interpretation. You know that screen that I talked about that you called the known? That is a chemical interpretation of sensory experience. And for the most part, it has been shaped for us since the day of our birth. That's a warrior training topic. So we'll talk about that type of thing on Saturday, because that's a different way of talking about the same thing, but it's a little not sciencey. So does all of this make sense so far? What do you mean, Santino? Like looking at Borealis last night?
It just appears, so you don't, when you're sensing it and it's something just appears in front of you, you don't really have that time to decide what came first, if that makes sense. It
You're right.
appeared.
Yeah. Oh, I forgot. That's where I was going. Thanks, Santina. I was going to, when somebody, have you ever heard I'll just get straight to it so that for the sake of time, have you ever heard someone say that energy precedes you?
Yes.
Or that, of course. And then we've always heard that energy precedes action, like energy precedes, right? So you've heard that your experience is on a delay because the light has to enter your eye. And we just talked about the sodium and the axons and the firings and chemicals. And then now you perceive the touch. That actually had a time delay. It's super fast, right? And so that's kind of what we're talking about.
Like lightning and thunder. They
Mhm.
have different time delays.
Mhm. Oh, Santina, where was I going with that though? I lost it again.
Santina was saying that it appears before we don't.
Oh, which comes first?
Yes.
And that's the bottom line, is that that's ultimately what we're looking to do here. And this is getting way ahead. But when you can clear your mind of thought, when you can clear interference, you can perceive subtle. You can actually, that subtle becomes a form of data. It becomes a form of information. It becomes something that you can respond to. Our society sometimes wants to call that intuition or synchronicity, that type of thing. I like to call it power, personal power, going with the Tao. These are things that we will talk about much, much later. But ultimately, that's what we would start to, that's the conversation that this would naturally start to lead to if we're doing our practice and we're able to create that space, that we start to interact with the energy that precedes the action. And that could start to look like, to at least a small extent, precognition type of thing. I've seen it, so I've felt it before, so it is what it is. Okay, but back to the program. So 4 directions of attention, I have described 2, and they're very familiar with us. The third is equally familiar. And remember that this is a functional grouping so that we can do these things all at once. Breath is breathing. You're aware of your breathing. Like, this isn't rocket science. And all of us here have been to a yoga class probably. So we know what it's like to be aware of our breathing. On Sunday, I'll talk about 5 breathing techniques that I use that I have found very useful because I can do them while doing everything else, while engaging these other directions of attention. I think there's a lot of amazing breath techniques out there, but I can't do reverse nostril breathing while talking to a customer at front desk. I would look stupid while I'm sitting there going back and forth with my noses. And I'm like, they're like, what the hell are you doing? And I'm like, oh, well, I'm doing my reverse nostril breathing. It's great though, when you're sitting at home comfortable on your floor, but you're not going to do that. You know, you're getting stopped by a cop or something and you want to regulate your breath and you're, you know, doing this technique that you learned in yoga class. It's like, it would be
So
really
choosing
interesting if you did
breathing
though.
as a
Yes.
point of so choosing breathing as a point of attention
Yeah.
does not have to be about manipulation of your breathing. It's just about awareness of your breathing, because your breathing is involuntary. It can be voluntary or involuntary. You don't have to be practicing a voluntary manipulation of your breathing to be aware of it.
Yeah, I would say the more that you manipulate it, the harder that it is to maintain awareness on it. So to be subtly aware of it and gentle, and we call that smooth breathing, is ideal. But I had to walk to work and I had to walk up the stairs. Maybe it was raining or something like that. And so I did need a little technique in that regard, you know. So I do have techniques because I don't breathe exactly the same throughout the day. I tend to follow 5 primary breathing patterns, and they all stem from smooth breathing. They may not always be smooth. You know, if I'm standing there and I get splashed with a mud puddle and I find that super annoying, I might have to have an audible exhale, a deliberate, strategic, get that energy out of my mouth before I get, before it doesn't benefit me. You know, the response is the response. It's already occurred. I'm annoyed. Does that make sense? So there's breathing techniques that could be very useful depending on your circumstances throughout the day, and I have 5 different ones. And so, but I'll talk about that as a part of warrior training, because in warrior training, it's time to start doing more formal and informal practices. And we start with one of the hardest things in this practice, and that is maintaining awareness on your breath throughout the day. Very few people I've ever met in my entire life can maintain awareness, and that's probably because they're trying to do it just one way. You can't. I mean, maybe you can. Excuse me. I don't want to put anybody in a box. But you're going to have a very hard time navigating your life experience just trying to breathe one kind of way all the time. Does that make sense? Does that sound like I'm making shit up, or does that at least feel like it could be possible?
It feels like it could be possible.
Okay. We have a vote. Shane says, of course, that's 2. I need at least 3 to continue. Okay, there's 3. All right. So now the 4th direction of attention, and this direction is functional. So just please remember that I've organized this so that we can work with it. Not to be arbitrary, not to say that, some other spiritual master is right or wrong, or that's irrelevant. I don't care about any of that. I just want to be able to do it. I don't want to be able to talk about it. I can, obviously, but I don't have to. If all of a sudden I woke up one day mute, it's probably good for some people because they're probably tired of listening to me, but I would still be able to do my practice. And that's what's the most important thing under the sun to me. So I could even lose senses and I'd still be able to do my practice. That's the most important thing to me. That's freedom. Nobody can take my practice away from me. Suppose unless they hypnotize me somehow. I'm going to have to learn anti-hypnotic techniques to make sure that nobody can do that. Or maybe my awareness would be so acute they would have more trouble doing it.
Or get hypnotized and then see if you were practicing while you were hypnotized.
Okay. More studies are needed. All right, so the fourth direction of attention, let's go to that. New whiteboard, but it's really just the same whiteboard, which is interesting. I click new whiteboard and it takes me to the old whiteboard, which is what I want, but that's not the button that you would think you should push. So cognition, obviously the main thing in cognition that we experience is words in our head. Who would like to argue that? Because I think that I could defend my argument quite well. I think I've been doing it since at least 2011, 2009 and 10 in my own mind, I started to defend this argument. Any questions so far? But there's so much more in cognition. Oh my gosh. And so I put this in cognition because it's so important and it dominates our experience so much that sensing our own emotion. I will put state of being because that is that's the whole screen. You know, there's a lot of pieces that go into state of being. How you woke up this morning, what you ate yesterday, what you plan to do tomorrow, the physical room that you're in, the physical body that you're presenting with, how you're presenting in this moment equals state of being. And that can actually become a focus of your attention. But we also have a musical part of our brain. So I'll put that there. Has anybody noticed that music does a really good job of calming your mind when you want it to? That's weird. Musical is a good one. Humor is a good one. That's why we like it so much. That's why we find it so entertaining, because it's using a part of our brain that can interrupt repetitive habitual streams of thought that aren't making us feel well. Now, it is still using words, but not all the time. There's a lot of humor, you know, there's a lot of things that you can find humorous. Hopefully it's appropriate, you know, like if you see somebody like trip and fall and you're just like laughing your ass off, you might, it's like, why is that funny? I always asked that when I was a kid. I was like, why is this funny? It looked like that shit hurt, and they may actually need medical attention. Why are we laughing about that? But I couldn't question it because then I would get bullied even more. Even when I was young, people didn't like you questioning the status quo. Okay, emotion, state of being, the musical part of our brain, the humor part of our brain. You know how to access these things. And you can actually, to some extent, hold that throughout the day. That's an advanced topic, but you can hold humor throughout the day. You can have a humorous edge to your bubble of perception where you just kind of, you know, it's all just a little bit silly. You could. That's not my favorite place to be, personally, because I'm earnest, but it's there if you want it. Now, my favorite, and this is the one that I'm going to make the most recommendations towards, is imagination. And I do mean two ways of looking at imagination. You could be daydreaming, or you could be superimposing over the present moment. And that means I'm imagining rainbows like falling from the sky right now. And I actually did. And that's not earnest. So setting up a mood would fall under cognition, yes. Implying that you're paying attention to the mood. It's the attention that charges it. If we say set up, that means we're doing things with our attention to help create that mood. And I would actually start to call that deliberate modulation. And I would actually say that that is only a reliable technique when we have created space in the overall volume of thought and not really before. Otherwise, we don't end up actually paying attention to the mood itself. We put attention on the mood, we set it up, it starts to go, and then we kind of go back to other things. It can be really easy to lose the mood, just like it can be really easy to lose the breath. So I do have an order of operations, and that's actually a good time to mention it. I will not try to maintain mood if I cannot maintain breath. I don't have the bandwidth at this moment. I don't have the power. I'm using that word in a way that would require a 2-hour webinar of definition. But I don't have the power right now for whatever reason. There's probably a myriad of reasons that I have allowed into my bubble of perception to cause this. But if I don't have a reliable awareness of my breath, cognition is not going to be a great place to try to live, because it's going to become unreliable and I'm going to end up coasting and I'm going to end up losing my practice, or it's going to start to dissipate, because once you start to maintain a direction, you can actually start to maintain that direction with very little effort. Now, it still requires voluntary attention. So body awareness for me, it must still be voluntary. I must still flash my attention on it. But it's so easy because I've practiced for so long. I don't have to set that up. It's like a switch. Same with external. It's like a switch. I can instantly turn it on if I feel like I'm starting to lose it. And actually, I feel going away from it before I fully lose it anyway. So I can feel myself going away from body awareness and it feels crappy and I hate it. So I feel it right away and I don't lose my body awareness. That's the bottom line. You will never drop out of the sky and say, hey, Ernest, where is your body? And I'm not going to have an answer for you. It's just not going to happen. And I have to assume that that will happen with all four directions, but I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that I have all four directions to that extent. I don't. I lose my breath attention usually is the one that I lose first. And if I lose breath attention, then I had already lost cognition attention. Is that fair? Does that make sense? And in your experience, wouldn't you say that maintaining your breath is a little bit probably more tricky than maintaining awareness of your body itself? Like, I think most of us who've done, these types of practices would say, yeah, maintaining a breath, that does require a little bit more bandwidth, a little bit more attention bandwidth, at first, at least, for sure. And so we have, okay, Santina. Yeah, we'll have the recording and we're almost done. Just a quick review is that we have three things that we're looking to do with these directions: establish, elongate, maintain. Establish, elongate, maintain. And wherever we are in this process is wherever we are in this process. Maybe I've just begun and I'm still trying to establish a direction and I'm forgetting almost all of the time. All right, bye, Santina. Thank you. Or maybe we have one direction, maintain, and we're learning to establish some of the others. That is this practice. You'll be 110 years old if you're still doing the practice, and you'll be in some flux of that dynamic. And maybe it's maintaining all four directions. I believe that there is something very important that happens if we can do that with reliability. We become the conscious creators that humans have always had the potential to be, not the dysfunctional organisms that we are presenting as right now. And I chuckle, but it's true and it's terrible. All right, any questions about the four directions? These become functional categories, and that's what we call the toolbox. And so that's a subject that we'll talk about. I think that's next. I think the toolbox might be next. If not, it's coming up very soon.